Hey everyone, thanks for coming. That's me, Chris. And the title of the presentation is Design for Hackers. Hopefully if you're here, you are considered a hacker of the variety that does not break into computers, but like make stuff. So I'm a junior in SCS, computer science and HCI. Although I'm kind of, I guess, the anti-CS major. I call myself a Christian first, a designer second, and a programmer third. So I guess I'm not exactly in the stereotype, but design is the subject that I'm covering for this talk today. And we're going to start with this clicker. Why learn design? So I guess my purpose for this talk is kind of just to convince you that you guys, as probably mostly engineers and CS students, that design is pretty important, that you should think about it. That's not just something that like some mystical thing that designers go into a room and figure out, and then they come back and like present you with something pretty. You can be involved in it too, and you should be. So why learn design? There are many great reasons to learn design. You can communicate with designers. You can pretty up your personal projects. You can do multiple roles in a team and win some hackathons. Obviously, these are all kind of half sarcastic, but I think there's some truth in them too. So yeah, you should learn design, and I hope to convince you why. So often people think of design as this thing that is all about like just making pretty pixels or sketching nice looking things, but it really starts with what is the product, what's the idea. And this is especially important if you're working in a hackathon, in a small team, where people have to take up multiple roles. You're just kind of forced to do that when you only have like a group of people. So it really starts with what's the concept, and this is something that not just a design guy should be focusing on. This is something that your whole team should be focusing on. So I recommend you get into a room like with some whiteboards or something. You start off figuring out hey guys, what's the idea here that we're going to be producing. That's what I mean by vision. And step 2 of that is once you have a good idea figured out, it's figuring out what the audience for that is. Who's going to be using this app and why is it useful for them? Third thing I recommend is generate an actual list of features that distinguish like what your app is doing and how you can, especially if you're doing a hackathon, like what is feasible for you to produce in the 24 hours or whatever. You should probably have a short goal, like something that's very feasible to accomplish, and a long goal that if you have extra time you can work on. And then after that, this is probably something that mostly your design guy, if you have one, would do, but everyone can sketch. Everyone can kind of figure out what this thing will actually look like, what the interactions will work, how the interactions will work. Second part, layouts. So this concept of hierarchy when you're laying out a page on the web. And these are all things that derive from print design, really. But if you just have if you're ever in an English class and your teachers ask you to write like these essays in like 12 point like Times New Roman, and they're all the same, it's really it can get really hard to read after a while. And that's why you kind of want to vary the size, the color, the font weight of your content. And like put images in there. When things stand out, it's easier just to scan the general page. And, grids. This is, again, something from print design. The idea of using columns that are kind of numerically spaced, like maybe you'll have a 100 pixel column and 12 of them across the page with maybe like 10 pixels in between each one. And then you can align your content to them. This makes it, I guess, kind of more nicely proportioned and organized. Something that you should be asking yourselves is whether you want your website to be fluid or fixed. Websites are naturally in the browser. They stretch the entire browser window. But a lot of popular websites, take Facebook for example, it's maybe about 900 pixels in width. And there are trade-offs of both. Responsiveness. This is a huge trend in the web today, just picking up momentum. But people want their websites to be to stretch to different sizes, to be usable on mobile phones, on tablets, on really big monitors. Typography. So this is all about fonts and type and stuff, text. I'm not going to explain too much about this because there's a whole study, but like a whole field of study on this. But Something you should know is the difference between a sans serif and a serif font. Serifs are those little, like, I guess, ridgy things that are on the letter forms. And basically all you need to know about that is that they each have different kind of personalities. Serifs are probably, you see them in very professional, I guess, serious, business-like publications. And sans serif kind of have a more modern tone and, I guess, sometimes a more fun kind of personality. So you should consider that. You should also try to make your text readable. So like, don't use like completely crazy novelty fonts that are difficult to read for your body text. Pick an appropriate size and line height. This is something that you can specify in the CSS that Ryan's going to cover. Personally, I like 16 pixels for my body text and 1.4 line height, which is the ratio of the space in between the lines to the lines themselves. But you should experiment with that because it's not really a one-size-fits-all thing. A lot of people have this misperception that, which was actually true back in like the 90s of web design or something. Like you can only use like Helvetica and Georgia and like Arial on your website because those are the only fonts that everyone has in their systems. So that used to be true. Now with CSS3, which is I bet Ryan's going to cover. It allows, through this feature called @fontface, you can use typefaces that you were not previously able to use. So there's a lot of creative uses of those nowadays. And these are four popular sources for kind of web typefaces that are all except for one free. Google Web Fonts especially has like hundreds of different fonts that you can use, and I really recommend checking it out when you're building your app. Color. Again, this is a whole field of study on color theory, so I'll just go over a few quick things. Saturation and brightness. Dark and dull colors are like usually kind of like have a serious tone again. Bright and intense colors grab attention, not attentions. But you can kind of take advantage of this when you're designing your web application. There are many things on web applications that involve different states. Buttons are probably the most popular use of these. Links. If you notice, if you've done any like kind of web development, like by default a web link will a hyperlink will be kind of like blue and underlined. You can kind of keep that around, but like you might want to style it a bit. Something that people often do is you color the link a different color than the rest of the body text. And the other thing that you want to do is like have it react and give feedback when you hover over it, when you click on it. So using different shades of the colors is really useful. Contrast. Can you read this? Can you read that? Don't make your website like light gray on white. That would just be terrible. Equally, don't make your website like blue on purple. There are certain color combinations that are just kind of hard to distinguish. I don't have time to go into like why, but just use your common sense. Some help. Cooler is a pretty cool website from Adobe that where people share like custom color palettes that they've made and they find aesthetically pleasing and nice to design with. So if you're kind of short for time, you can use those. 0 to 255. You give it, so web colors are specified in hex codes that kind of give their red, green, and blue ratio values. If you give this website a hex value, it will give you back all of the darkness, well, a lot of different darkness shades for that color, which is really useful, as I said, when you're designing those buttons and things that need to change states. Colors is an app for Mac, just by this indie developer that allows you to just kind of have this magnifying glass that you can go to any spot on your screen and grab the hex color for it. Style. Okay, so this is kind of an ambiguous word for, I guess, like things that make your application look nice or have personality. But you should consider them. Texture. There's this big movement in the web today to use, I guess, things from the real world. Wood, watercolor, paper, dust, these are all kind of textures. And they can give your site kind of like, a kind of personality and a kind of feeling of integration with the real world, and not just kind of this, I guess it kind of takes you away from the feeling that it's just pure technology. This is a really great website that I like, scottylpatterns.com, and it gives you some nice tiling backgrounds that can, take up any space of content. And they're not like really obnoxious in the amount of texture. They're like pretty, like, as the name suggests, subtle. So you can use them for your backgrounds and places like that. Kind of in contrast is minimalism, like just the concept of like cutting out all the texture, cutting out extraneous color, just letting stuff be, I guess, bare bones as far as the style goes, and letting the content speak for itself. This is kind of like a trade-off, and you need to figure out, I guess, what the direction you want for your application is, like what kind of personality you want to define it. And it also goes back to what we said about what the audience for your application is, really. Illustration. So this is, I guess, something less common, but if you have someone on your team who can draw, who can paint, who can sketch really nicely, that is a huge advantage. You should really take advantage of that, and I'll show you some examples. OK, here is an example of great use of texture. This is a Tumblr theme by a designer named Megan Fisher. You can see at the top there, it's using like lots of interesting like map cartography textures in the background, and like all these kind of subtle gradients. Like the latest from Twitter box has like this 1 pixel kind of drop shadow inset there that like kind of makes it like stand out from the background. These are the kind of things I'm talking about when I talk about texture. And if you're going for that kind of look, you can kind of look at sites like these and start off by kind of replicating what they do. And this is a good example of a very minimalistic design in this interesting web application called Skillshare. And you can see that they use very minimal colors, whites, grays, and where they do use colors like the orange and the blue, it's meant to highlight something that's supposed to grab your attention. That's the really good thing about minimalism, I guess. When you do something that's a bit different from the norm on your website, it can really distinguish and stand out and grab people's attention. This is a great example of an illustrator's approach to a website. This is by a guy named Raji King. He's a guy who has a background originally in CS, I think, but then he kind of transitioned to illustration and eventually to web design. So he uses his really great illustration skills when he's doing web design. But you can see all these like kind of cute features on this website that make it look really fun, even though it's like something kind of mundane, like websites for nonprofits. But like there are like these cool cloud patterns and like the wood there and like these like cute little icons. They all help contribute to this really fun personality of the site. Equally so is this website for a iOS apps company called MindSnacks. This is also kind of designed by an illustrator turned web designer who is able to use his illustration skills to make these mascots and like kind of lay out these vector images and sharp-looking shapes that also give a really fun look to the site. Usability. So for something completely different, I guess, you should also be considering how easy it is for someone to use the site. Because at the end of the day, your application needs to actually be used by people, not just look pretty. So I already talked a bit about this concept of feedback when I was talking about buttons and colors and stuff like that. But basically, when people do an action on your website should react visibly to that change. So when people hover over a button, it should not look the same as when they're just staring at it. And equally so, like when people I guess go to the next page in like a Google search or something, you're not just going to like increment like one small number from 1 to 2, as I guess computer scientists are like kind of apt to do with like their data ingrained minds. Like make it visible to the user that they're in a different state than they were before. Affordance. This is kind of a related concept, but this is like before you even click the button, does it look clickable? Before you even go to the next page, does it look like you can go to the next page? your website should have hints to show like what people can act on the page. Consistency. We talked about establishing this personality, this style across your site. Make sure that if you establish that kind of personality, that you're consistent across like everywhere across your site. Don't just like have this really highly textured like one page and then someone goes somewhere else and like it's all minimalistic. Which is precisely obviously what I did for this presentation, but don't do it for your website because your website should be consistent. Error prevention and handling. People are going to make mistakes on your websites. Spend some time investing into that and making sure that when they make mistakes, they know that they made a mistake and they can recover from it easily. And in the first place, try to make it so that they have a lesser chance of making those mistakes. Designing in code. This is a practice that I really advocate, especially for, I guess, most of you guys as coming from technical backgrounds, as like hackers. This is something that is you guys are at a great advantage if you step out into the design world, or even like get your feet wet in it. This is something that people in like CFA in the School of Design will probably not, well, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to take advantage of. But designing in code is really great, and that's something that Ryan's going to cover a lot more in his talk. But like everything, at least on the web, is powered by these core technologies of like HTML and CSS, JavaScript. CSS is the main one that you're concerned for in terms of design. It kind of styles all your website. And people have traditionally, designers traditionally design these kind of things in an application like Photoshop or Fireworks, all these kind of great Adobe products and other web-related applications. The problem, though, is that when they actually go to implement them, it involves a lot of there's like this kind of dissonance where you have to hand it off to some engineer who like is completely a different guy, and then they have to like figure out what the designer intended with their limited kind of, I guess, mock-up, and then they have to interpret that and take it into like this actual working functional thing. So that's one reason why I advocate designing in code with CSS. The mock-ups become prototypes really easily, but there's some other reasons for doing this. It's really easy to make changes. In CSS, as Ryan will tell you, if you want to drop something from I guess being aligned to the top left to being aligned to the bottom right and 2 pixels smaller, whatever. It's really easy to do that because it's all just you need to make 2 character changes in your code. It's actually a little more difficult in a visual editor like Photoshop. It might not be when you first start off designing in code, but as you do this, it gradually becomes a lot easier, at least in my view, than using something like Photoshop. And it suits if you have a kind of a technical mind that already thinks in numbers, it's going to suit your kind of brain a lot more better than these kind of visual editors. CSS3, the new, I guess, version of CSS, this web technology, is super versatile. You can do a lot more with CSS these days than you could 5 years ago. There's this nice website called css3please.com that kind of gives some examples of how you can use CSS3. And it also allows you to copy snippets and edit them. So yeah, I advocate using CSS3 when you're designing from the very start in making your mockups. But this should come after your sketching stage. This should come after you've kind of planned out how everything looks. And it is also not always the right answer. Photoshop and these kind of visual editors are sometimes superior. And usually this is when you want to take a step back from I guess the technical view and just figure out how things are going to lay out. When you're doing kind of a less traditional layout, in which things are kind of less, I guess, numerically laid out and more kind of visually laid out. I guess I'm not really being clear with that, but I guess you'll know when you get to it. If you have an application that you want to have a particularly like completely crazy creative layout, you should probably start off with Photoshop or something that will allow you to not get too ingrained in the code from the start. Getting inspired. This is something that I think is really important for designers and other people interested in design. OK, so there's this website called Dribbble that's kind of new, but it's really good. It's where kind of like some of the world's top designers go to post like little cropped screenshots of what they're currently designing, what they have designed. And the content on there is usually really great. If it's kind of like a Twitter or Facebook type thing where you can get an account, you can follow your favorite designers, and you can see when they update with new work. And you can do that even if like, you're not really a designer yourself, which I think is pretty interesting. So yeah, I mean, get a Dribbble account, follow it, and like get inspired by what people post. And it's not that, like you should rip off what people are doing, but there's this quote attributed to Pablo Picasso that's like, great artists or good artists copy, great artists steal, or something like that. Don't actually steal people's designs. That would kind of make them angry, but like do get inspired by what people make and like the innovative stuff that people are doing. Because Dribbble is kind of like the cutting edge of the design community, in my opinion. There's this nice application that I use called Little Snapper for Mac. There's probably something similar for Windows. It's $40, but if you're serious about this stuff, I think you should get it. It basically allows you to take these full-length screenshots of web pages and stick them into this catalog. I think I now have like, I don't know, like 10 gigabytes of just like screenshots of websites that when I'm like starting off the design process on a new piece of work, I look through and see if like anything in particular that I've already seen inspires me. OK, so you only have 24 hours for this hackathon. So you might be thinking, like, how am I supposed to learn all this stuff? Well, to be honest, like, coming to this talk isn't going to make you a great designer overnight. Part of it is, I guess, just like inherent kind of aptitude to design. Part of it is also like practice. So, you're not going to become a great designer tomorrow, unless you already are like really good, I guess. But here are some things that can help, some more resources. Premium Pixels is a website by this designer called Orman Clark. He publishes mostly Photoshop files, PSDs, but also like some other stuff that are some pretty sharp-looking resources that you can use for free in your web application. If you're this is especially great if like you're not like, I guess, you don't consider yourself a designer, because these are like free, like pretty sharp-looking resources that you can use. Bootstrap from Twitter. This is a kind of a CSS style sheet that styles like basic elements on your website and makes them look pretty nice by default. I would say that, so this is a pretty recent release from Twitter. It just came out like a few months ago. Already like tons of websites, a lot of mainstream websites are using it. And I guess a word of caution is that like now, if you notice websites that use Bootstrap, like almost all of them like kind of look the same, and you can kind of see like I would not be surprised if you've not seen this before. Go to this website and like look at what Bootstrap looks like, and you'll be like, oh, that's why like these like 50 websites that I've been seeing the last few months all look the same. So don't rely too heavily on it. Like if you have the skill to design stuff yourself, then like by all means like do stuff from scratch or just get inspired by this kind of stuff. But this is for like if you're like not really a designer, you can use Bootstrap and it'll make your stuff look a lot better than if you had like just started from scratch maybe. Most of all, experiment and have fun, because like that's both, I guess, the point of this, especially with a hackathon, and it's also how you get better. Like I said, you're not going to become a great designer overnight. Just keep on trying new stuff. Try stuff that you think is kind of weird and quirky, but creative, and you'll improve. Want to learn more? CS is not the only good academic program at CMU. This is kind of my pitch for the School of Design and HCI, I guess. But yeah, these are some courses I recommend. I can only recommend ones that I've taken, but these are all kind of courses that you need to take in the HCI double major. The first one, Communication Design Fundamentals, it kind of covers like this visual stuff and like style, color theory, and that kind of stuff, typography. Probably my favorite class I've taken at CMU, actually. Basic Interaction Design is 05421. Interaction design is just kind of a study of like how things work and how you can make things like work in a more usable and efficient manner. So it's a really cool class to take, I guess. 05410 is HCI methods, otherwise known as user-centered research and evaluation. But it basically tells you about how you can interview people and get their feedback and kind of run kind of tests and that kind of stuff to figure out how usable your site is. So that's not like really, I guess, design in terms of making stuff look pretty, but design in terms of like catering to people. Thanks.
Sweet. Hey guys. So I'm Ryhan, and that's my Twitter handle. I'm giving this talk on HTML and CSS. JavaScript is coming tomorrow night. You should come back for that. Anyways, so when we talk about HTML and CSS, we're really talking about building like a web app on the client side. So, the technologies that you're going to end up using for any sort of web app that you do are going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And they're all sort of very interrelated. They all sort of rely on each other. You can actually create a single HTML document that incorporates all three of them, and they all work cohesively together for your project. That said, it's really important to understand the distinctions between them and what each individual each individual purpose of each technology. So HTML in particular is sort of like the meat of your content. It's the structure, it's the images, the text that you have, it's the buttons, the forms. It's everything that you want people to see on your page. CSS, on the other hand, is how things should look to the user. So that means where is it positioned, the colors, the size, all of that is controlled by CSS. Finally, JavaScript is sort of the behavior of your app on the client side. So if I click a button, how should it react? Or if I visit the site, should it report it to Google Analytics or not? That's all done via JavaScript. Again, JavaScript jQuery is tomorrow night. You should come back. Seth Fargo is awesome. So I'm going to start off with a quick overview of really basic HTML. Just for a quick show of hands, how many of you guys are really comfortable with HTML at this point? OK. All right. So HTML is sort of based around tags. And so here I have a foo tag, and there's stuff inside of it. And foo describes stuff. Also, tags have to be closed with this slash. And there are a couple really heavily used tags that you're definitely going to have to use at some point. These are probably the most basic ones. They're covering paragraphs, links, and just sort of styling text. And if we were to use them in context, for example, I have a sentence over here. And you can see that the stuff within the M, which is for italics, it only italicizes the stuff within M. And the stuff in the parent tags, the paragraph tags, is sort of unaffected. And you can sort of nest tags in HTML as much as you want. And so that's sort of basic, very basic HTML. So let's go ahead and build a sort of page. We're going to start by creating a index.html page. And that's just so that your browser recognizes this as HTML. And we're going to start off with an HTML tag. So again, it knows it's HTML. We're going to start off with a doc type, which Jeff forgot to include yesterday. And this is the HTML5 doc type. It's a lot better than what it used to be for XHTML4. Essentially, that just sort of tells your browser, these are the rules I'm going to be using for HTML and CSS. That way, when you open your site in IE, it doesn't break as much. Then we can go ahead and add in some content. Anything you want people to see has to be put in between body tags. You only want one set of body tags. I remember HackU a couple years ago, someone put multiple body tags in their site, and that really broke things. Anywho, so I put hello world here in paragraph tags. And so if you were to type this into a text editor and open it, you just get a page that says hello world. So that's really the basics of what you need on any sort of page. We can also add in a lot more additional information. So I've included head tags here. And the head sort of describes stuff that the person doesn't see when they open the page, but it has a lot more information about the page. So for instance, right here I have like a title, which would show up like on the tab. But we could also put stuff like descriptions and lots of other cool properties that primarily Google would care about. Finally, I'm going to add in some style. So here I've set the background color of the body, which is pretty much the entire page, to be red. You'll notice that the syntax is kind of different from the rest of the site. And that's because this is actually CSS, not HTML. So just as a quick primer of basic CSS syntax, this is sort of what CSS looks like. You start off with some sort of selector, which usually is the tag, the HTML tag that you're trying to focus on. So in this case, I'm saying all paragraph tags, anything that is within a paragraph tag should get these rules. Then we can add some properties like color, font size, font. There's tons of them online. Just Google it. And then you can set a value. And again, there's lots of different ways to set the values for these things. Generally, they're pretty straightforward, though. Once we've done that, we can do some really cool stuff with selectors. If you guys know HTML, really quickly, HTML has IDs and classes. IDs are specific to a specific element. Don't use the same ID on multiple elements. Classes are classes, so you can use them everywhere. An element can have as many classes or IDs as you want. So if we wanted to target like a certain set of paragraphs, then we can just add a class like p class my class. And then in our CSS, we just use p.myclass. And then we can use whatever CSS rules we want. And it'll only apply to those paragraphs. Similarly, for IDs, we can use the pound symbol instead of dot. And that'll just target those IDs. It might be a little confusing why we would have both IDs and classes. So IDs are mainly useful in JavaScript. In CSS, there's really not a major benefit to using either or. Personally, I'd recommend just using classes so that you can reuse a class later on and not worry about screwing up any of your JavaScript. There are also some really cool sort of conditional formatting things you can do. So here I have 2 tags, foo, bar. And so this is saying any stuff that's within bar tags that's within a foo tag gets selected. So to put it in context, it's sort of like if I want to select all links within paragraphs, but not links outside of paragraphs, I just use p space a. And then it'll only select the links within paragraphs. It's just really, really simple. Similarly, we can actually throw in a plus there. And this is sort of less well known. And that way, it'll select the first element after foo. So if I want to select the first link that comes after my paragraph, I can do that. This is really useful, especially with headers and paragraphs and things. Headers have a tendency to put weird margins, and so this is a quick way to fix that. There's also interesting new ones like nth child. So you can throw in a number there. You can throw in even, odd. So you can select every third paragraph you want. It's particularly useful for lists and tables, so you can get different highlighting for cells and stuff like that. With CSS, there is something called the box model. To put it shortly, it's like everything is a box. Pretty much your paragraph tags and any other tag, you can represent it as this rectangle that has a height and width. It also has some sort of border and margin. The border can be 0 pixels, 1 pixel, 10 pixels if you want. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. And then your margin is the space between your element and the elements around it. Finally, there's something called padding, which is the space between the edge of your element and the stuff within it, which sounds kind of odd. But so, for example, say I have a paragraph, and I set the background color to be red, and I want some space between the text and the edge of the red. Then I just increase the padding, so it sort of pushes it down like that. Sort of messing around with all of this is really, really easy. With CSS, you just use like margin, padding, border. It's pretty straightforward. Similarly, boxes can be treated like blocks. And so there's actually this thing called display block in CSS. Blocks essentially are full width elements that sort of stack. So if I have two paragraph tags, I don't want them to sort of line up together. It'll sort of make a new line for them. Also, I can use an inline block. So they'll sort of wrap around. Sort of like if I have if I write one sentence and a sentence afterwards, it'll just keep wrapping. And most elements are either like display block or display inline block, and they're usually like that for a reason. So if you find yourself having to toggle these a lot, you're probably doing something wrong. That said, I've also noticed that a lot of people start using elements and trying to turn things into sidebars and whatnot. Rather than taking divs and really abusing divs, use HTML5 tags. We have tags that describe pretty much every major part of a web page, from your header to your nav, sidebars, like main article stuff. It's all there. Look it up. So now onto something a little more interesting. CSS animations are pretty much the coolest thing ever. I was saying earlier that JavaScript is really what you use to get interesting behavior into your web app. That said, CSS3 is actually really, really cool and lets you do a lot of interesting stuff. So you can actually have a lot of interaction on your site without using a single line of JavaScript. So I'm just going to walk through a quick example right now. This is some CSS to do a quick animation that pulses a link. I have a:hover. That means it's a link, but when I hover over it, use the CSS. Animation pulse 5 seconds. That's calling an animation that I've defined here called pulse, and it's going to loop that every 5 seconds. And here's my keyframe, which sort of describes what to step through. So it's going to start out being red, then go to black, and then fade back to red. And it's going to fade all of these automatically. So if you guys wanted to see what that would look like, there you go. I love Keynote. So the coolest part, though, is that you can do this with pretty much any property. So you can change like the 3D position, the 2D position. You can change the size, the opacity, the proportions. Any property of CSS can be like tweaked with these animations. So it's a lot of fun to play with, and you can do a lot of really interesting things with it. That said, there's a couple of things that I want you guys to know about that are kind of beyond the scope of this talk. If you have your laptops out, just really quickly Google some of these. CSS transforms, yeah, everyone starts tapping, okay. CSS transforms let you do things like rotate things. You can change the scale of things. You can move things in 3D. It's really, really cool. It's kind of new, but lets you do some really interesting effects. CSS transitions will sort of smooth the difference between two states. So if I have like a hover state for an element, it'll sort of make it glide up and fade in between my properties. So it's kind of like a keyframe between just two classes that I already have. Finally, HTML5 canvas is very useful if you're trying to do something that is like almost like to game level. It's really annoying to have lots and lots of elements on your page. If you're like playing a game on your page, you don't want to use divs everywhere. When you use canvas, I don't know if you guys have used like tkinter for 110 or 112. It's sort of like that in the sense that you're sort of drawing on a canvas and you're not dealing with individual elements. And again, especially with JavaScript, you can do some really cool effects with canvas. After this talk, you should go check out this link. I'll probably bring it up afterwards, but there's some really cool 3D effects that this guy called Ryhan does with all of these properties. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about media queries, which are increasingly important these days. They sort of give you rules that your browser interprets. So I'll bundle these rules with my CSS. So when you open my page on your computer will look at the CSS and decide what parts of my CSS it should apply. And it seems kind of weird, like why would I want to do rules based on my computer? But it's actually increasingly important because we have lots and lots of different devices, more so than just like desktops. when you want your website to scale from a 27-inch iMac down to an iPhone, you really need to sort of do something to scale it properly so that it's kind of fun to use no matter what device you're using. So over the last couple of years, responsive design has become a lot more popular just because the idea that you can reflow content based on the device width makes things a lot more fun to use for people. Right? So if I take the example that we were working on earlier, you'll notice that I changed the background color red to a width 800 pixels. That's just so you guys have an idea of like what it would be like to set a desktop width on a site. Thing is, normally you kind of want to override that, just because that's kind of annoying on like tablets or smartphones. Because if it's like a 900 pixel wide website, that means I'm going to do a lot of zooming when I like load it up on my touch. So we're going to go ahead and add this media query. That's sort of the basic syntax for it. There's lots of other properties you can use. But here I've set it so that if the width of the screen is smaller than 500 pixels, use the CSS within there. And that pretty much mainly targets mobile devices. And so here I've set it so that it'll shrink the website down to 320 pixels wide when I load it up on a mobile device. And I use 320 pixels because that's sort of the width of an iPhone screen. I'm very much an Apple whore. Anyways, I can also do other things, like not only scale the site, but do stuff that makes it better on mobile devices. So here I've added some like touch-friendly like CSS. So I'll take all the links and increase the padding around them and make them more buttony. That way it's easier to tap them like when you're on a mobile device. There are actually a lot more cool stuff you can do with mobile web. An important thing to know about is the viewport. I don't know if you guys, most of you guys have smartphones. So when you load up like full desktop sites, you'll notice that it sort of fits the entire website into like this like 4-inch screen. And that's because it's using a virtual window. So when I say 1 pixel in my CSS, that doesn't map to 1 pixel on the phone. It'll actually interpret it as like 1100 pixel wide screen. And that makes things kind of annoying because then you're going to have to do lots and lots of zooming when you first load your page. And you guys have definitely used like Facebook on your smartphone, and you know how it's like it fits well, and there's no zooming or anything. It's been formatted properly, and you can just scroll through it vertically. And so we can duplicate that really quickly using this meta tag that'll adjust the viewport. So I've gone ahead and set it so that I'll make the width of my website automatically set to the device width. I've set the scale so that it's 1.0, which means a direct mapping of when I say 1 pixel, it means 1 pixel on the phone. And then I've set it so that people can't multi-touch zoom in and out of things, which is something you should debate, but generally I think it's better to leave it that way because particularly iOS has some rotation bugs that are kind of annoying. I know you guys only have 24 hours during this hackathon, so rather than building everything from scratch, you should consider using some other tools. Remember that there are like a couple components to the client side, and trying to get all of these to work cohesively is actually kind of complicated. And so rather than coding it all yourself during these 24 hours and trying to make it work in every browser, rely on the work of much smarter people who have worked on this for a number of years and have created tools just for this. So when you use things like frameworks, you're going to use code that people at Twitter have used, that people at Twitter have built for you. And that way, it just sort of works in every browser. It's really easy to change things around, and it all looks really good. And so you can spend more time sort of messing around with how things should be laid out rather than worrying about how to actually code it. If you're interested in doing like a mobile site, you should definitely check out jQuery Mobile. It's way better than Sencha. iWebKit is kind of meh. So yeah. Also, if you're planning on doing like a normal desktop site, you should definitely check out Bootstrap or Skeleton. Bootstrap is by Twitter. Skeleton is much more lightweight than Bootstrap. These both scale down to mobile, and they'll sort of make your site a lot nicer just by default. Finally, if you're interested in doing a mobile app, like an iOS or Android app, but you don't want to go to the iOS or Android talk on Monday, then you can use PhoneGap and build your native app. Sorry, Dylan. You can build your native app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and still hook into device APIs via JavaScript. It's really cool. You should definitely go check it out. You guys still have like a week, so I definitely encourage you to go and check out Bootstrap and Skeleton particularly. They're really easy to use. They have lots of template files already there. You can just dump in your content. It's really easy to play with. So go download it now. So if you guys have any questions, yeah, no questions? Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you put the report slide up?
Yeah, sure. Scrolling. There we go. Yeah.
Where did you get the high-res rage comic faces?
There's actually a site called alltheragefaces.com.
That's what it is?
Yeah, alltheragefaces.com or something like that. It is amazing. If there are no other questions, I really want to show you guys a couple quick demos. Okay, where's my mouse? I hate dual screening. Okay, so I was talking about CSS transitions earlier and how much I love them. So these are really, really simple. They're about like 3-4 lines of code each. And they're really easy to steal too. You can just inspect them. Anyways, so they're really simple effects, and they add a little bit of like fun to your site, and they're really easy to add. Yeah. This is an example of the sort of 3D transforms I was talking about. So when we click on images and stuff, you can see it like moves in 3D and like feels 3D. But you can do way more than that. And so here we have like a dropping effect. And it's just like, I think it's just like the coolest thing ever. And you should definitely go look at the code. Finally, this is an example of moving something in 3D and lighting it correctly, which is actually really hard. Anyways, so he has a white div on top of this div, and he's done the math so it'll rotate correctly. So if I like hover over it, where is my mouse? Yeah, so you can see like where the element actually is and how it's moving. And just by setting the rules properly, it gives this really, really cool effect of like a 3D like object moving in space. And so you can take this and adapt it and create like 3D objects or something, I don't know. But there's a lot of stuff you can do with that. So any questions? No? Okay. Guess I'm done. Yay?